I don't know if you're familiar with the Jimenez case, where she killed 2 children and she only got 120 days. A lot of people say that it's like a lack of trust, like it's not enough for the moms and the parents that lost their child. And so they don't trust the legal system. They feel like the legal system is just not doing enough. So would you push for harsher charges for such cases?
I think it depends. I think there's twofold, right? I do think that sometimes the crimes, and just so that people, because some of your watchers might be in DC, so they get confused. Right. Criminal law in the state of Maryland is only changed in Annapolis. We're not like DC Council where I can just change the criminal law when I want, because we're not, they're quasi a state and a city at the same time. So, right, the charge for murder is the charge for murder all over Maryland. So if you want to tweak anything, you got to go to Annapolis to tweak it. That's number one. And I would say, so when it comes to like the charges itself, sometimes we have a case like Lieutenant Collins, right? It was the hate crime at University of Maryland. We needed to lower the standard to prove it was a hate crime. Murder was proven, but it was murky. And I was in that committee at the time. We all looked at it and said, yes, we can change this all for Maryland. Sometimes on a criminal case, depending on the facts, you might not feel, or the victim's family might not feel justice is served. But it depends very specifically on and I would want to read the full fact. I know about the case, but I didn't like read the entire case file or all the evidence, right? You'd have to see like, was there something that stood out that we have to change the criminal law for all of Maryland? So when you change it, you're going to change it for Prince George's County and Cecil and Somerset and Wacomico and Baltimore City and Montgomery County. And do the votes in Annapolis agree with that change? And do the fellow states attorneys across the state agree with that change? Now, DC, being a border, it's very confusing. They can change criminal law as they see fit because they're quasi a city and a council at the same time. So criminal law is purely state. So I would say that sometimes justice doesn't always feel good, but I would also throw back to the residents and as state's attorney, were you looking for justice or vengeance? Justice and vengeance are two different things, because in criminal law, I have to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. If there's any question to it, it depends what the jury's going to come back and say to me as the prosecutor. I would also say, and I always use O.J. Simpson because that's easy and people know that. Yeah. O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, right, on the death of his ex-wife or wife. But he was found culpable in the civil trial, and that's why he had to pay Miss Nicole's family out. Because it's a different standard when you sue. So when you sue on a negligence or whatever occurred. So I would say that I think an easy answer that makes someone feel good is like, of course I believe in a harsher penalty. Let's do that. But also, if you want if you pull back the layers, it's more complicated than that. If you want a harsher penalty on any guilty for that charge, you're requesting a mandatory minimum, which means the judge has no say in the penalty. Mandatory minimums directly impact Black men, which means they end up always getting that, and they're in jail for a long time and you can't break it. So the question becomes, do you trust judges' opinions and why we spend so much money on their salaries to make a decision on sentencing? If you say and I give people an example, assault is an unwanted touching. Me touching someone like this is assault. Me smacking someone is assault. If you want the same penalty for an unwanted touch, well, smacking might lead to a second degree assault, but you know what I'm saying. Yes. You have to use you use the judge to say it should be this amount of days or that amount of days. So the thing about justice is it's very live. Every judge has a different opinion. It depends on the facts of that case. Depends on the background of that jurist, of that judge, and the jury pool. Different jury pools come out with different answers, and I almost have the similar case. The courtroom is a fluid thing. It's an active thing. And I think that's why my candidacy versus any of my opponents, I think being in all three roles, being a legislator, being a prosecutor, being defense, I bring a certain level of energy. And this energy is the energy you're going to see in the courtroom. If you're a prosecutor just like, I've been doing this for 20 years and blah, 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 is that going to engage a jury? Yeah. Okay, so it's like, there's also like there's the law, but the practice of law also has an art form to it. That's live in the courtroom. And so I could be tweetable and give a yes answer, but the reality of the answer is it is much more complicated than that when you study the system.
Yeah.
I had the similar thing with a victim in my district, baby Jeremy, who got killed in Langley Park. It was on the news. It was a crossfire shooting. Mom, innocent toddler, right? And and the mom was very upset. And I wasn't involved in that case, and I was not state's attorney during that case. But I would say to someone, you have to prove that X bullet was X person. When it's a crossfire, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt that it was X person's bullet, A person's bullet, or C person's bullet. There could have been, I think the case could have been handled in a greater way. That is my opinion. But I do try to be honest and give people those things. And what that tells me as well is the top cop at that time, the top prosecutor, are you really holding the hand and walking victims' families through what's going on? Because that's the kind of time I'm going to take with victims' families, is explaining what's going on with the case, having them be a part of every step of the way, and understanding that the kind of mourning they're going through is a kind of pain I will never be able to understand. But justice and vengeance are two different things. And what I can prove in law, and look, when we find that it wasn't just, I am always for going to Annapolis to change it, which is why we changed the law on Lieutenant Collins. We changed the law on strangulation. Men were choking women and it wasn't being and killing them. It's called strangulation in DV cases. We went and up that. We always adjust criminal law. But you also have to convince the rest of Maryland,
right?
The entire Judiciary Committee, the entire Judicial Proceedings Committee in the Senate, that this change is necessary. And if you can do that, then the change is probably a good change. But it will take work. And it's easy to say, of course, I want a harsher penalty. But are you the kind of prosecutor that's going to go out there and get it? That's the difference. And it takes legislative work to do that.
Okay. So you're not just the yes, ma'am, you're facts. You're like, well, I want to say this, but I'm not going to lie to you, which is great because people can easily be like, oh, of course, yes, that was, but we like the fact that you're laying it out.
Yeah,
You're giving us the realities of what that's going to look like and the facts.
Yeah. And I'd have to go see, in the case, what part of it led to the lower sentencing exactly. And then did that reflect a thing in the law or did that reflect the judge's opinion? I couldn't tell you just because I didn't do that case and I didn't follow it line by line. I followed it on the news like everybody else, but it's very different when you read the jury instruction, when you're in there every day for the hearings of the evidence that's presented. Reading a news article about a case as a former prosecutor and as a defense attorney, that's not reading a case.
Have you ever had a case that was really complex where you were kind of torn?
Yes. Yeah. I've had cases where one of my cases it's concluded now obviously, but it was we dropped the attempted murder. See, the person was upset. The young man hit the other man in the head with a hammer, broke the skull. You could see part of the skull. I did that case, but see, when you add facts, it changes it up. The man that was hit in the head, the victim, had been abusing the other man's sister for 10 years of domestic violence. All this went down at the nephew's birthday. The brother, the defendant, the guy that hit him in the head with the hammer, for sure, he was held. It was a family flame that it just went.
Right.
And so did he definitely do assault? Yes, I got him to plead guilty to the assault. Right. But it took a lot of painful time and meetings to say, this was not attempted murder. And what also is, you have to still know the culture of your county. The sister who had been abused for 10 years, the defense was going to take the stand and talk about that abuse for 10 years and why the brother went and hit the head in the hammer. So now I know, well, what kind of mentality is my jury going to have now with that fact? Right. So I always tell the public, it's just, if I just said guy hit head in the hammer, exposed skull, attempted murder. Yeah, that's murder. Yes. But when I bring you all the facts, well, where do you feel on that? For me, it ended up being a plea of guilt to first degree assault. He ended up doing I think it was in the end, by the time we got there, it was 100 and something days in jail. I did time serve and then 6 months on supervised probation. And it was a win-win of a guilty on the record, but it was definitely going to be
Yes.
a Russian roulette, like a dance, like a risk to go to trial. And was as a prosecutor, was that worth the risk to lose the case entirely? Or and you know, for some things it is worth the risk, some things it's not.
Yes.
This was an intense family dynamic and crime that led to a very bad criminal action. And I felt the result was, I stand by my same result now, even though it's been 5 years since that case, but I remember it well. I still stand by my guilty plea.
Wow.
Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.